Yo, this is oldboy 82, and you're on the channel that just gives you everything, you know what I mean? Proper English, you know what I mean? We're friendly down here. So, anyway, I want to start giving you stories out of here. Great detective stories, the mammoth book of great detective stories. It is edited by Herbert Van Taal. Yeah, it's I don't know who's it produced by. Just give them some shout outs. Robinson Publishing there. There's the detective stories ever made available. Right, so there's the book. Thank you to Manchester Grammar School for donating this to the channel for me to do this. Anyway, here we go. So let's see. People actually people read to go to sleep to this. So this is by E.C. Bentley, and it's the inoffensive captain. The first in the little podcast sort of thing I'm going to be doing detective stories. So here we go. Inspector Charles Moorhead, introduced by Chief Inspector W. Murch. Trent was reading from a card brought to him as he sat at breakfast. I had no idea, he remarked to his servant, that Mr. Murch was introducing a new kind of policeman. What does he look like, Dennis? He might be anything, sir. A very ordinary looking man, I should say. Well, that's the highest compliment you could pay a plainclothes officer, I suppose. Trent finished his coffee and he stood up. Show him into the studio, and if he should happen to arrest me, telephone to Mr. Ward that I am unfortunately detained and cannot join him this evening. Certainly, sir. The two men who came together in Philip Trent's studio looked keenly at each other. The police officer, who did not much approve of the mission on which he had been sent, was not reassured by what he saw. Trent was at this time, it was a few years before the unravelling of the Manderson affair came to change his life, a man not yet 30, with an air of rather irresponsible good humour and an easy, unceremonious carriage of his loose-knit figure that struck his visitor as pleasing in general, but not in keeping with great mental gifts. His features were regular, his short curling hair and his moustache, and indeed his whole appearance suggested a slight but not defiant carelessness about externals. Mr. Muirhead, knowing nothing of modern painters, thought this quite right in an artist, but he wondered what could have led such a man to interest himself in police problems. As for Inspector Muirhead, he was a lean, light-haired, upstanding man with a scanty yellow moustache, dressed in an ill-fitting dark suit with a low collar much too large for his neck. The only noticeable things about him were an air of athletic hardness and a pair of blue eyes like swords. He looked like a Cumberland shepherd who had changed clothes with what? A rent collector. I'm very glad, said Trent, to meet my friend, any friend of Inspector Murch's. Sit down and have a cigar. Not a smoker? So much the worse for the criminal class. You look as if your nerves were made of steel wire. Now, let me hear, what is it you want of me? The hard-featured officer squared his shoulders, put his hands on his knees. Inspector Murch thought you might be willing to help us unofficially. Mr. Trent, in a little difficulty we are in. It concerns the escape of James Rudmore from Dartmoor yesterday afternoon. I hadn't heard of it. Well, it's in the papers today, the bare facts, but the details are unusual. For one thing, he's got clear away, which has happened only in a very few cases at Dartmoor. Rudmore did what others have done, made a bolt from one of the gangs doing outdoor labour, taking advantage of a mist coming on suddenly. But instead of wandering on the moor till he was taken again, as they mostly do, he got onto a road some miles from the prison, where he had the luck to meet a motor car going slowly in the mist. He jumped out in front of the car, and when the chauffeur stopped, Rudmore sprang at him and gave him a knock on the head with a stone that stunned him. The car belonged to an American gentleman and his wife, by name Van Someren. They were touring around the country. Gratifying for them, remarked Trent. They will feel the English are not making strangers of them, that we are taking them into our bosom, as it were. Mr. Van Someren drew a revolver, pursued the detective stolidly. He shot twice before Rudmore closed with him. He managed to get hold of the weapon after a struggle, and so they had him at his mercy. He was hurt slightly in the arm by one of the shots. Mr. Van Someren thinks Rudmore made him give up his motor coat and cap and all he had in his pockets, also the lady's purse. Then he put on a coat and cap over his convict dress and drove off, alone, going eastward. The others waited till the chauffeur was all right again. Then they made the best out of the way and got out onto another road by foot. Sorry, I messed up a bit there. It was hours before they got to Two Bridges and they told the story. He managed it well, Trent observed, lighting a pipe. Decision and promptitude. He ought to have been a soldier. He was, returned Mr. Muirhead. He had been, at least. But the point is, where is he now? We now know that he drove the car as far as Exeter, where he abandoned it outside the railway station, taking with him 2 large suitcases and a dressing bag. There can be no doubt that he came on by train to London, arriving last night. He has particular business here, as well as friends who would help him. Do you remember the Danbury pendant affair? Mr. Trent, it's nearly 2 years ago now. I don't. I probably was not in England at the time. Then I may as well tell you the story of it and the Rudmores. You must know it. If you're to assist us, old John Rudmore was for many years a doctor in very good practice in Calcutta. He had been an army doctor at first. He was a widower, a man of good family, highly educated, very clever, very popular. His only son was James Rudmore, who was a lieutenant in a Bengal cavalry regiment, very much the same sort of man as his father. There was a daughter too, a young girl, 6 years ago, when James was 23. Something happened, something to do with old Rudmore, it's believed. It was kept dark quite successfully, but the word went out against the Rudmores. The old man threw up his practice, and the son sent in his papers. All 3 of them came home and settled in London. The Rudmores had influential connections, and Jim got a soft job under the Board of Trade. His sister went to live with some relatives of her mother's. The father made his headquarters in bachelor chambers in Genlin Street. He travelled a good deal. He was interested in mining properties. He seemed to have amassed a great deal of money, and it was believed he made his son a considerable allowance. Was there supposed to be anything wrong about the money? That we don't know, but what happened afterwards makes it seem likely. Well, James Rudmore went the pace considerably. He got into gambling, dissipated, weren't particular about what friends he made. He was intimate with some of the shadiest characters in sporting circles, people he'd had an eye upon more than once. He was a reckless, desperate chap with a dangerous temper when roused, and he was well on his way to being a regular wronger when the affair of the pendant happened. But he was very clever and amusing, and he had a light-hearted way with him, a gentleman all over to look at, and he hadn't lost a caste, as they say. Sorry, this is just me interjecting the language back in the day. A regular wrong, and that don't mean he's a fucking nonce, a paedophile or nothing. A regular wrong just means a regular bad chap back in these days. Anyway, Trent nodded appreciatively. You describe him to the life. I should like to have known him. One day there was a big garden party at Danbury House, and he was there helping with some sort of entertainment. Lady Danbury was wearing the pendant, which was a famous family jewel containing 3 remarkable diamonds and some small stones. It was late in the afternoon before she found that the chain it was attached to had broken. The pendant was gone, and by that time many of the guests had gone too, and James Rudmore had gone along with them. A search was begun all over the grounds, but it hadn't gone far when one of the maids, hearing of the loss, came forward with a statement. It seemed she'd been philandering with one of the men servants in part of the grounds where she'd no business to have been at. Well, she decided that the Countess had been receiving people there, but it was deserted at the time. The man's eye was caught by something on the grass, and the girl, going nearer to it, recognised the pendant. Just as she was hurrying forward to pick it up, they heard steps on the path, and thinking it might be one of the upper servants who would make trouble about her being out there, they both stepped behind a clump of shrubbery. There was James Rudmore. He come round the corner of the path. He was alone, and he seemed to be looking for something on the ground. He caught sight of the pendant and stood, and he gazed at it just for a moment. Then he picked it up, and holding it in his hand, he went on towards the place where the company were. That was all the 2 saw. Naturally, they thought he was carrying the thing straight to the Countess. It never occurred to them that a man of young Rudmore's appearance would steal it. Well, it's a silly thing to do, Trent remarked. He was in a tight place, explained the detective. It came out afterwards that he was deeply in debt and had just dropped a good sum on the stock exchange. He wanted money desperately. He had one resource, suggested Trent. I've heard it described as tapping the ancestor. The ancestor, said Mr. Muirhead with a hard smile, was away on his travels looking for some Eastern African mining proposition, and apparently he couldn't be got at. Besides, as you'll see, tapping him might have been not such a good idea, and James no doubt knew that, for their relations were always very close and confidential. But as I was saying, the two witnesses told their story about the finding of the pendant. An hour afterwards, I was out after James with a warrant in my pocket. About 9 o'clock, I arrested him as he walked into the hotel where he lived. He denied the charge with a show of astonishment and indignation, but he made no resistance. The pendant was not on him then, and it was never found. I took him away in a taxi cab. In Banton Street, he gave me a blow on the jaw. He knocked me out. He jumped from the cab and darted round the corner into Whitcomb Street. There, he ran into the arms of a constable who held him. He fought savagely, and he was only secured by the help of two men. He didn't get away again, I'll tell you. Until yesterday, Trent observed. Where has he been? Has he been between leaving Danbury House and returning to his hotel? Well, he's apparently at a club in the Adelphi, where he played billiards for an hour and then dined. His story was that he'd walked straight in from Danbury House and gone straight from there to his hotel. It couldn't be shown that he'd been anywhere else, but nobody knew exactly when he had left Danbury House. His line at the trial was that he knew absolutely nothing of the pendant and that it was a plot to ruin him. The case against him was unanswerable, and the assaults on the police, of course, made the matter much worse. He was sent to penal servitude. And that's the end of this reading. If you liked the reading and you'd like to carry on with this story, tune into the next one. Oldboy 82, over and out. Bye bye.